A woman who lived on a small Australian island mysteriously disappeared before meeting her parents. The police quickly got involved in the case, and they began to unravel a very strange tangle of clues and leads. The situation was complicated by the fact that nothing like this had happened on this island for over 100 years, and the police were completely unprepared for this. In the end, they still managed to find out a very unexpected truth. But with it, even more questions arose. Janelle Patton was born on June 30th, 1972 in Sydney, Australia. She was the only child in the family, and the girl's parents devoted all their attention and love to her. Since childhood, she was fond of music. The girl played the piano and clarinet, and was also a member of the school musical group. After finishing school, Janelle entered the university to become a doctor, but after a year, she decided to leave school and focus on work. She got a job at a bank, and over the next few years built her career. However, over time, Janelle began to understand that life in a big city, with all the accompanying difficulties and problems, affected her very negatively, and the woman began to think about moving. In October 1999, when she was 27, she decided to move to a small island called Norfolk. It was located almost 1,500 kilometers from Australia, but was part of it. At the same time, in those years, local laws were in effect there, and there was its own customs, so the island was considered a fairly independent place. The population of Norfolk was only about 2,000 people, so all the locals knew each other quite well. In addition, due to the great remoteness from civilization, new people appeared there quite rarely, with the exception of tourists. The island was popular with both Australians and New Zealanders, which was located a little closer. Janelle quickly found a job at a local hotel, met the islanders, and eventually joined their measured way of life. Norfolk had a small-town feel, enhanced by the fact that there was nothing but ocean for hundreds of miles around the island. For this reason, everyone on the island tried to get along with each other, since they really had no other choice. In late March 2002, a year and a half after moving there, Janelle's parents decided to visit their daughter, and Janelle was looking forward to the meeting. They arrived on May 30th, and Janelle spent the entire day showing them the main sights of Norfolk and introducing them to the island's residents. The next day, she had a morning shift at a hotel, and she and her parents planned to meet right after work. Janelle had rented a small house on the property from a local woman, and there was no room for two people there. For this reason, the woman rented a hotel room for her parents. The next morning, Janelle finished work at about 11 a.m. and went on her daily walk. She regularly walked a short route from her house to a viewing platform on the edge of the island. The parents expected their daughter to come to their hotel at about noon, but Janelle was clearly late. At first, they thought the woman might have some urgent business, so they decided not to waste time and went for a walk. Before leaving, they left a note for their daughter on the door, but when the parents returned at 2:30, the note was still there. Realizing that Janelle had not come for them, the parents began to worry. They tried to call her, but the woman did not answer. It all seemed rather strange. The parents did not understand where their daughter could have disappeared to on a small island, and were worried that something could have happened to her. They reached her house and found that the front door was unlocked. However, this was not unusual for Norfolk. The locals rarely locked their doors, as crime was almost never committed on the island. There was no Janelle inside the house, nor any evidence that anything had happened to her. Her car was also parked nearby. While the parents were inside, one of their daughter's friends drove up to the house. They told her that they had not been able to contact Janelle all day, and the woman suggested that they drive along the route that Janelle walked almost every day. The three of them looked along this route, but she was not there either. The parents then returned to their hotel and told the manager what was happening. He made several calls, asking various people if they had seen Janelle, but this also did not bring results. By this time, it was already around 8 in the evening, and the woman's parents decided to call the police. They told her that they had not been able to find their daughter all day, and the officers called them to the station. There, the police told them that just an hour before their call, a tourist from New Zealand had found a body near the waterfall. She had noticed some large black bag and came closer, where she saw human hands visible from under the bag. The police arrived at the scene and found the body of a woman. She had multiple visible injuries, and some of her clothes were missing. At the time of Janelle's parents' visit to the police, the officers had just begun to examine the crime scene, so they immediately assumed that the deceased could be their daughter. At the same time, the investigators decided to call Janelle's neighbor, from whom she rented a house, for identification, so as not to subject the parents to such an ordeal. The woman arrived at the scene and immediately confirmed that the deceased was indeed Janelle. The police handed the body over to medical examiners, but after a visual examination, they already realized that, most likely, it was a murder. The islanders were shocked by this news. The last murder there occurred in 1893, and less serious crimes were very rare. Local police had rarely encountered anything more serious than fights and domestic disputes, but now they had to find the killer. For this reason, they immediately requested help from Australian investigators, and they flew to the island. Medical experts found 64 injuries on the victim's body, including abrasions and cuts left by some sharp object, like broken glass. To confirm this version, they found glass particles in Janelle's hair, which apparently belonged to a broken bottle. In addition, bruises were found on the victim's wrists, as if someone had held her hands. At the same time, experts admitted that the victim was held at the very moment when she was injured. This indicated that there could have been several criminals. Along with the cuts left by glass, there were also wounds consistent with a knife. Forensic experts found microscopic particles of green and white paint on Janelle's body. They were also present on her clothes and in her hair. According to experts, the paint could have gotten on the victim's body directly from the criminal or his car, for example, when he got rid of the body. At the same time, the experts were unable to find any traces of abuse, although the partially missing clothes indicated this motive. However, they managed to find a third-party DNA sample on the victim's body. Only it belonged to some unknown woman. The situation was complicated by the fact that at about 3:30 in the afternoon, a short but very heavy rain fell on the island. It could have washed away important clues, such as boot prints, blood, and other biological samples. At the same time, the rain made it possible to determine that the criminal hid the victim's body before it began. There were puddles on the black oilcloth, which means that Janelle lay there for at least 3 hours before she was discovered. While the experts tried to find at least some evidence, the police began to reconstruct the chronology of the victim's last hours of life. They established that after work, the woman went to the store and then headed home. At the same time, the owner of the house arrived there and saw Janelle heading for her daily walk. About 10 minutes later, another local resident drove along this road in a car and saw Janelle there. The next witness, who lived almost at the end of this route, also noticed the woman. This time she was standing next to a white car and talking to the driver. According to the witness, it seemed to her that there were 2 men in the car, but she admitted that there could have been only one. 5 minutes later, 2 witnesses who lived near this road heard something like a child crying in the distance. Another man heard a scream, but when he went outside to check what was happening, the sounds had already died down. Thus, the police established that the victim was attacked at about 11:45 a.m., that is, just half an hour after the end of her work shift. Having received no solid leads, They decided to send the black oilcloth that Janelle's body was wrapped in to the mainland to be examined with advanced equipment. Sometime later, they received the results. Experts found 10 different fingerprints on it, but all of them were partially smudged. Despite this, the detectives still decided to try to find a match. They made a list of all the people who were on the island on the day of the murder and received more than 2,700 names, including locals and tourists. The police asked all people aged 15 to 70 to voluntarily provide their fingerprints and DNA samples, but only half responded to this request. Among the 1,300 fingerprints, the experts were unable to find a single match. As a result, the investigators decided to focus on searching for possible suspects among Janelle's acquaintances, and her diary helped them a lot in this. The woman regularly wrote about what was happening on the island and the relationships between its inhabitants. After studying the diary, the police found quite a lot of interesting information there. It turned out that Janelle had a rather tense relationship with one of her friends. When she first moved to the island, this woman helped her find temporary housing in the house of her friend. However, Janelle didn't stay there for long. Apparently, they had some kind of disagreement, but even after she moved in, the man was acting suspiciously. Several witnesses said that he once threatened Janelle in the middle of the street. The police also found out that after the body was found, he asked his friend to say that he had spent the whole day with him, even though it was not true. Investigators were never able to figure out why the man was acting like this, but they did find out something. Apparently, he was in a secret relationship with the same friend who had a husband and children. Janelle mentioned this in her diary, and perhaps the guy didn't like the fact that she found out about their relationship. Despite this, they both provided their fingerprints, which did not match the samples from the black bag. The police also searched their homes and cars, but were unable to find any leads. The next suspect was a man with whom Janelle had been in a relationship for 9 months. He was also checked for possible involvement, but this time, the police were unable to find any evidence. In addition, the diary mentioned several other people with whom Janelle had a tense relationship, but they all agreed to give their fingerprints and DNA. At one point, the police even considered the parents, sacrificing them as suspects, since the murder occurred the day after they arrived on the island. But this version could not be confirmed either. Since then, there has been no progress in this case. For many months, the police tried to find new suspects, re-examined the existing evidence, but all this led them to a dead end. At one point, they announced a substantial reward of $300,000 for information on this case. However, all the leads received did not bring them any closer to catching the culprit. 2 years later, investigators reopened the case, and the first thing they did was review the fingerprint samples they had collected. They also added all the fingerprints they had collected from suspects in other cases that had happened on the island in recent years. All of these prints were on paper, so experts had to compare each one by hand. This process took a long time, but eventually, detectives got the call they were waiting for. The fingerprints of one of the suspects in another case matched 2 prints found on the black plastic sheet that Janelle's body was wrapped in. That man was 26-year-old Glenn McNeil. Shortly after Janelle's murder, police questioned him on suspicion of home invasion, but no arrests were made. Despite this, his prints were taken, and they have been kept in the case file ever since. The police also learned that in 2002, McNeil had a white Honda, and as we remember, a witness saw the victim next to a similar car just a few minutes before her death. Another curious fact was that the man left the island shortly after the murder. He moved there from New Zealand in 2000 with his wife and got a job as a cook, but later they divorced, which also happened shortly before leaving. At the time of the investigation, McNeil lived in New Zealand with his new wife and 2 children, so it was quite problematic for the police to interrogate him. However, they understood that the man was unlikely to take the car with him from the island and decided to try to find it so that forensic experts could examine it for evidence. Soon, they actually succeeded. The white Honda that McNeil drove was abandoned on someone else's property among the bushes, and it was handed over to experts. Investigators also requested a search warrant for the house where he lived while on the island. After examining every millimeter of the car's interior, experts found particles of white and green paint that matched the particles found on the victim's body. There were also several glass shards, and exactly the same ones were found in his former home. Detectives invited an expert who determined that these samples, as well as shards from the victim's clothing, not only matched 100%, but were melted down at the same time for the same type of product. They also found a small part of an engraving on one of the shards, which turned out to be the name wine. Thus, experts confirmed that all three types of shards came from the same wine bottle. In the yard of McNeil's former home, police found a black oilcloth of the same type in which the body was wrapped. In addition, several human hairs were found in the trunk of his car, as well as biological traces. However, both of these pieces of evidence degraded over time, and it was not possible to extract DNA samples from them. The detectives then decided to send the hairs to a lab located in the United States, since they had the most advanced analysis tools. This process took a whole year. The first lab was overloaded, and they could not start the analysis for a long time. As a result, one of the investigators had to fly to the United States and transfer the hair to another lab. In early 2006, the police finally got the result. The experts were able to establish that the hair really belonged to Janelle. Having collected all the available evidence, the detectives received an arrest warrant for the man and went to New Zealand, where they took him into custody. McNeil was deported to Australia and formally charged with murder. During the very first interrogation, he unexpectedly, for the investigators themselves, began to give a confession. According to the man, that morning he smoked weed and went for a drive around the island. At some point, he reached down for a fallen pack of cigarettes, lost sight of the road, and crashed into something. At first, McNeil thought he had hit an animal, but as soon as he got out of the car, he saw a human body under it. Panicked, the man loaded it into his trunk and drove home, where he spent several hours using illegal substances. Soon, he heard some sounds coming from his trunk and realized that the woman was still alive. Then he took a kitchen knife, opened the trunk, and stabbed her several times. After the deed, McNeil wrapped the body in oilcloth and drove it to the waterfall. Despite the confession, detectives immediately realized that the man was lying. Almost everything he said was at odds with the actual facts. Medical experts who examined Janelle's body were sure that the injuries she sustained were completely inconsistent with being hit by a car. In addition, McNeil's version did not explain the bruises on her wrists, the puncture wounds from the shrapnel, and the fact that someone had removed some of her clothes. Moreover, if the man had really stabbed her several times while the victim was in the trunk, there would have been traces of blood that the experts would not have been able to miss. But there was none. The police tried to get the truth by pointing out all these facts, but McNeil continued to insist on his version. Eventually, they decided to take the case to court, and the trial began in the summer of 2006. It took place on the island, and the jury was selected from among local residents. McNeil immediately stated that he had nothing to do with the murder and did not even remember giving any confession to the police. He explained this oblivion by the fact that he had serious mental problems, although there was no medical evidence to support this statement. However, by the time the trial began, the detectives managed to dig up something interesting. They understood that McNeil's lawyers would latch on to the fact that female DNA was found on the victim's body. It was present not only on Janelle's clothes, but also under her fingernails. This could indicate that the victim had managed to scratch this woman before her death, meaning that she could have been directly involved in the murder. After McNeil's arrest, investigators spoke to everyone Janelle knew and asked if there was any connection between them and the victim. One of her friends recalled that just 2 or 3 weeks before her death, Janelle asked her if she knew a woman named Alicia and her husband, Glenn McNeil. She replied that she did not know them personally, but she had seen them, and Janelle changed the subject. The same friend said that on the day of the murder, she was working at a hotel. At some point, she saw Alicia on the street. The woman was covered in something red, and Janelle asked her if everything was okay. Alicia was clearly worried about something, but she replied that it was just paint and left. For some reason, the witness did not consider it necessary to tell the police about this. At that time, she simply did not see any connection between what happened and the murder of Janelle, and remembered it only after the police asked about McNeil and his wife. Alicia was called to court as a witness and stated that she had nothing to do with the murder. It is noteworthy that later this friend of the victim changed her testimony and stated that a certain religious cult of 6 people was behind her murder. This was a big surprise for the investigator, and all previous testimony was automatically called into question. McNeil himself continued to deny any connection to the murder, insisting that he did not remember his confession at all. Nevertheless, with the available evidence, the jury found him guilty, and on March 9, 2007, the man was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Even though the case was finally closed, many people continued to question McNeil's guilt. The most popular theory, based on eyewitness testimony and injuries, was that the man could not have acted alone. Either he committed the murder with someone else, or he helped someone else dispose of the body. A few years after the trial ended, McNeil suddenly announced that he actually knew who killed Janelle. It was the man who sold him drugs. According to McNeil's new story, he was at home that morning when a man came to see him with his wife. He said that he had a human body in his trunk and demanded that McNeil get rid of it, otherwise he would harm him and his wife. Frightened, he complied with this demand. The man dragged the body into his trunk, wrapped it in oilcloth, and drove it to the waterfall. He also added that he used medical gloves, but the investigators noticed one discrepancy here. There were several fingerprints belonging to him on the oilcloth, which would not have remained if gloves were used. In addition, the man said that after the crime he buried these gloves in his yard, and the police dug up the entire area, but no gloves were found there. At the same time, McNeil gave them the name of this man who allegedly killed Janelle, and he was indeed suspected of selling illegal substances. In addition, the police requested McNeil's phone history and saw that he regularly called this man. However, this could only mean that McNeil was simply buying goods from him. In the following years, several more theories about this case emerged, each of which was highly dubious and controversial. For example, some media outlets even put forward a version that Janelle was a secret police informant, and this could be the real motive for the murder. However, no serious confirmation of this or any other theories was ever found. On February 1, 2024, McNeil was released from prison early and deported to New Zealand. There, he will remain under supervision for some time while he is on probation, but in fact, he is already free. All these years, he has continued to stick to the story that other people committed the murders. Perhaps one day he will change his story again, and we will learn the whole truth. Until then, there will be many questions left in this case.